The smell of gunpowder always takes me back to that rooftop in Kandahar province, March 15th, 2019. I was lying prone, watching insurgents through my scope, while my spotter, Corporal Jamie Martinez, my best friend and the sister I never had, whispered wind calculations beside me. 200 meters wind southeast at 8 miles per hour. I squeezed the trigger. Perfect shot. Then an IED exploded beneath our position. I survived with shrapnel wounds and a concussion. Jamie didn't make it home. That explosion didn't just kill my best friend, it shattered something fundamental inside me. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep without seeing her face, couldn't hold a rifle without my hands shaking uncontrollably. The nightmares came in waves. The sound of the blast, the smell of burning concrete. Jamie's voice cutting off mid-sentence. The Army doctors diagnosed me with severe PTSD and recommended medical discharge. I took it without hesitation. I never wanted to kill again. But 3 years later, standing in the parking lot of Pine Ridge Military Base on this gray October morning in 2024, I realized that running from who I used to be hadn't made the memories disappear. If anything, the suppression had made them stronger, more intrusive. Sometimes I wondered if the only way to control the monster inside me was to let her out just a little under controlled circumstances. My name is Emma Carter, and for 3 years, I've lived a carefully constructed lie. To everyone at Riverside Medical Center, where I work as a trauma nurse, I'm just another civilian who chose healthcare after college. They have no idea that before I learned to save lives, I was Staff Sergeant Emma Carter, one of the Army's most elite snipers responsible for 63 confirmed kills across 4 combat tours. The familiar scent of gunpowder mixed with crisp autumn air made my hands tremble as I signed the waiver. Not from fear of shooting, I'd fired more rounds than most soldiers fire in their entire careers, but from absolute terror of being discovered. I'd worked so hard to bury that part of myself, to become someone normal, someone who healed instead of harmed. But the nightmares had been getting worse lately. Last week, a car backfired outside the hospital, and I'd hit the floor, instinctively, muscle memory overriding 3 years of civilian conditioning. My colleagues thought I'd tripped. The weight of constantly pretending to be someone I wasn't had become unbearable. Maybe coming here was a mistake. Maybe I should have stayed home, continued pretending that Emma the nurse was the only Emma who existed. But deep down, I knew I needed this. I needed to prove to myself that I could still access those skills if necessary, that I had control over when and how I used them. I dressed carefully for invisibility that morning, faded jeans, plain gray sweater, blonde hair pulled back in a deliberately messy ponytail. To everyone around me, I looked exactly like what I was pretending to be, another curious civilian trying shooting for the first time. Pine Ridge's civilian range buzzed with its typical weekend crowd. Active duty soldiers from nearby Fort Campbell mixed with weekend enthusiasts and grizzled veterans. The mechanical sounds of firearms being cleaned and loaded, the distant sharp cracks of gunfire from indoor ranges, the low rumble of masculine voices discussing ballistics. It all felt like stepping back into a life I'd fought so hard to escape. "First time here, miss?" asked Corporal Davis, a young soldier manning the registration desk. "Yes, it is," I replied, deliberately softening my voice to sound uncertain. The lie came easily now, after 3 years of constant practice. Sergeant Marcus Webb, a stocky man in his 30s, with the confident swagger of a career soldier, was cleaning his rifle at a nearby bench. He glanced over with what I'd learned to recognize as professional assessment rather than simple condescension. "Well, you picked an interesting day to start. We've got some serious shooters here today." Staff Sergeant Kyle Morrison, Webb's shooting partner, looked up from methodically loading magazines. His eyes swept over my stance, the way I held myself, clearly cataloging details. "You mentioned this is your first time at a range." Have you had any instruction at all? Even YouTube videos or basic safety courses? Master Chief Tom Bradley, a weathered Navy veteran, walked over with the measured gait of someone who'd spent decades evaluating threats and capabilities. Ma'am, I don't mean to be presumptuous, but I noticed you looking at our equipment setup. Most first-time shooters focus on the targets or look nervous about the noise. You're observing our shooting positions and stance techniques. That suggests some level of prior exposure. I felt a chill of alarm. These weren't just weekend warriors making sexist assumptions, they were experienced military personnel who knew how to read people. I'd have to be more careful about maintaining my cover. I may have watched some instructional videos online, I said, carefully, adding a slight nervous laugh. I wanted to do some research before coming in completely blind. Webb nodded approvingly, but I caught the way his eyes lingered on my hands, probably noting the calluses that hadn't quite faded from years of weapons handling. Smart approach. A lot of people come in here with movie expectations and end up hurting themselves or others. Morrison studied me for another moment. What made you choose a .22 to start with? Most beginners either go too big out of bravado or let us choose for them. My heart stopped. I hadn't requested a .22. I'd been planning to ask for a 9mm to test my capabilities. But Morrison's question suggested he expected me to choose the beginner-friendly option. I was walking a tightrope between maintaining my cover and not arousing suspicion through obviously fake incompetence. Actually, I said, trying to sound like someone who'd done just enough research to be dangerous, I was thinking about trying a 9mm. The videos I watched said it's good to learn on something you might actually carry for self-defense. The three men exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Bradley stepped forward with the patient tone of someone explaining something to a child. Ma'am, I appreciate that you've done some research, but those YouTube instructors don't know your physical capabilities or experience level. A 9mm has significant recoil and muzzle flash that can be overwhelming for someone who's never felt that kind of power in their hands. Webb nodded in agreement. We see this a lot. People think they can handle full-power cartridges because they've seen it in movies or online videos. But the reality is that most new shooters, especially women, find anything bigger than a .22 intimidating once they actually experience the recoil. The casual condescension in his tone made my jaw clench, but I forced myself to maintain the facade. I understand your concern, but I'd like to try the 9mm if that's possible. I can always switch to something smaller if it's too much. Morrison shrugged. Your choice. Just don't say we didn't warn you when you're jumping at every shot. As I completed the paperwork for a Glock 19 rental, I caught fragments of their conversation about previous shooters who'd overestimated their abilities. Their assumptions weren't entirely unfounded. They clearly dealt with a lot of people whose confidence exceeded their competence. But their automatic dismissal of my capabilities based on gender and apparent inexperience still stung. Lane 12 was my assignment, positioned between Webb in Lane 11 and Morrison in Lane 13. The setup was perfect for observation, which I realized might not be coincidental. They wanted to watch me fail. Setting up my station, I opened the rental case and removed the Glock 19. This was the most dangerous moment. The weapon felt like an extension of my body, and every instinct screamed at me to handle it with the professional competence that had been drilled into me for years. Instead, I forced myself to fumble slightly to hold it with the uncertain grip of someone who'd only seen proper technique in videos. Magazine release is right there behind the trigger guard, Webb called out helpfully, though I noticed he was watching my every movement with professional interest. As I loaded the magazine, muscle memory fought against my conscious efforts to appear inexperienced. 15 rounds, chamber empty, safety check. I whispered, automatically running through the mental checklist that had kept me alive for 4 combat tours. What was that? Morrison asked sharply. My blood turned to ice. I'd slipped into military terminology without thinking. "Oh, nothing important," I said quickly, forcing a nervous laugh. "Just trying to remember what the safety video said about checking if it's loaded properly." Webb nodded, but his eyes remained watchful. "Good instincts. The fundamentals are everything in shooting." Range Safety Officer Sergeant Martinez began his rounds checking each shooter's setup. Everyone clear on the basic rules: muzzle pointed downrange at all times, finger off the trigger. Unless you're ready to fire, no rapid fire without authorization. I loaded my magazine and chambered around the mechanical sounds achingly familiar. The first relay was set at 10 yards, close enough that even a genuinely inexperienced shooter could hit the target. Webb started first, his shots clustering reasonably well in the 8 and 9 rings. "Warming up," he announced with satisfaction. Morrison followed with similar results, most of his rounds finding center mass. "Feeling good today." Then it was my turn. I raised the pistol, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The weight, the balance, the sight picture, it all felt like coming home after a long exile. My first shot surprised me with how completely natural it felt. 9 ring, Martinez called out. "Good hit for a first shot." I deliberately aimed slightly off-center, trying to appear competent, but not suspiciously so. But even that small concession to maintaining my cover felt like a betrayal of everything I'd been trained to be. Second shot, 8 ring. Third shot, 9 ring. Fourth shot, 10 ring. Fifth shot, 10 ring. Webb glanced over with mild interest. "Not bad at all. You've got steadier hands than most beginners." Morrison was paying more attention now. "That's actually pretty impressive grouping for someone's first time. You sure you haven't done this before?" I could feel the facade starting to crack under their scrutiny. The temptation to show them what I was really capable of was becoming overwhelming. "I guess all that research paid off," I said, trying to sound pleased but modest. Martinez approached to examine my target more closely. "Ma'am, that's genuinely good shooting for a new shooter. Most people are just trying to hit the target somewhere their first time out." Bradley had also moved over to observe. "Those last 2 shots were dead center. That's not beginner's luck, that's developing consistency." The weight of their attention was making me nervous, but not in the way they thought. I was terrified they'd see through my act, but I was also fighting an almost overwhelming urge to drop the pretense entirely and show them what real precision looked like. "Since you're doing so well," Webb said with what might have been genuine encouragement or a test, "how would you feel about trying something a little more challenging?" My pulse quickened. "What kind of challenge?" Morrison grinned with the expression of someone about to reveal something exciting. "We've got a hostage rescue drill set up on the advanced range. Multiple targets at various distances, some marked as threats, others as hostages. You have to engage the threats while avoiding the hostages, and you have to do it under time pressure." Webb nodded enthusiastically. "It's a lot more realistic than just punching holes in paper. Real shooting situations require decision-making and precision under stress." The scenario they were describing was exactly the kind of training I'd done hundreds of times in the military, but with live hostages instead of paper targets. My hands started to shake, not from nerves, but from the memory of similar situations where the stakes had been real. "I don't know," I said, letting genuine uncertainty creep into my voice. "That sounds pretty advanced for someone who just fired their first shots." "Now come on," Morrison pressed. "You've got natural ability. Besides, we'll be right there to coach you through it." Bradley nodded agreement. "It's good to challenge yourself. Plus, it'll give you a taste of what defensive shooting actually requires." The rational part of my brain was screaming warnings. This was exactly the kind of scenario that could trigger my PTSD, could expose capabilities I'd spent 3 years hiding. But another part of me, the part that had been suppressed for too long, was hungry for this challenge. "Okay," I heard myself saying. "I'll try it." The advanced range was set up with multiple target stands at distances ranging from 7 to 25 yards. The hostage targets were photographs of civilians, men, women, children, while the threat targets showed armed figures in various tactical positions. The similarity to real combat scenarios I'd encountered made my chest tighten with anxiety. "The drill is simple," Martinez explained as we approached the starting position. "You'll have 60 seconds to neutralize all threat targets while avoiding hostage targets. Any hits on hostages result in immediate disqualification. Any missed threats that could reasonably return fire also count against you." Webb handed me a shot timer. "This adds the stress element. You'll hear a beep to start, then another beep every 15 seconds to let you know how much time you have left." Morrison positioned himself where he could observe my technique. Remember, speed matters, but accuracy matters more. A perfect score is 6 threat targets down 0 hostage targets hit, completed in under 60 seconds. I studied the course layout, automatically calculating angles, distances, and optimal shooting positions. The tactical part of my brain was already planning the engagement sequence, identifying which targets could be addressed from each position, how to minimize movement while maintaining clear fields of fire. "Any questions?" Bradley asked. I shook my head, not trusting my voice. The familiar pre-mission tension was building in my chest, the same feeling I'd experienced before every real engagement. But this time, it was complicated by 3 years of suppressed trauma and the constant effort to maintain my civilian facade. "Shooter ready," Martinez called out. I positioned myself at the starting line, Glock 19, held in a low, ready position that felt disturbingly natural. "Ready." The timer beeped. For the first few seconds, everything went according to plan. I engaged the nearest threat target at 7 yards center mass hit. Moved to the next position, acquired the second target at 12 yards, another solid hit. The movements felt automatic muscle memory taking over despite 3 years of civilian life. Then I saw the third target set up and my world tilted. It was a threat target positioned directly behind a hostage target, a scenario that required an extremely precise shot to neutralize the threat without hitting the civilian. But the hostage target was a photograph of a young woman in military fatigues. And for one horrifying moment, it was Jamie's face looking back at me. The sound of the shot timer faded into the background, replaced by the phantom echo of an IED explosion. My hands started shaking uncontrollably as the familiar symptoms of a panic attack began to cascade through my system. Tunnel vision, rapid heartbeat, the overwhelming sensation that I was back on that rooftop in Kandahar watching Jamie die all over again. Mater Martinez called out, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. I stood frozen at the firing line, Glock 19. Trembling in my hands, unable to complete the course or even lower the weapon. The 3 men were staring at me, with expressions ranging from confusion to concern. "Hey, you okay?" Webb asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. "It's just a training exercise. No shame in finding it overwhelming." That simple kindness broke something inside me. Maybe it was exhaustion from 3 years of pretending to be someone I wasn't. Maybe it was the realization that I couldn't run from my past forever. Maybe it was just the overwhelming loneliness of carrying so many secrets. "I'm fine," I said quietly, lowering the weapon with movements that were far too controlled and professional for someone supposedly having their first panic attack at a shooting range. But I wasn't fine. I was tired of lying, tired of hiding, tired of pretending that the most defining experiences of my life had never happened. Morrison stepped closer, his expression shifting from casual interest to genuine concern. That wasn't a beginner's freeze-up. That was something else entirely. Bradley nodded slowly. The way you handled that weapon, your shooting stance, even how you're standing now, that's not civilian body language. Webb was studying me with the same intensity he'd probably used to evaluate potential threats in combat zones. Ma'am, I think it's time for some honesty. Who are you really? The question hung in the air, like smoke from a discharged weapon. I could feel the walls I'd built around my old life crumbling under the weight of their collective scrutiny, and my own exhaustion from maintaining the facade. For a long moment, I considered continuing the charade. I could claim that the stress of the exercise had overwhelmed me, make excuses about watching too many military movies, anything to preserve the careful separation between Emma the nurse and Staff Sergeant Carter the sniper. But looking at their faces, professional soldiers who clearly recognized something in me that resonated with their own experiences, I realized that the pretense had become more of a prison than a protection. The breathing technique I was using during that drill, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest, is called raptor breathing. It was developed by Colonel Patricia Hawkins for use in high-stress shooting situations. I'm guessing you've heard of her. The change in their expressions was immediate and dramatic. Webb's eyes widened with recognition and something approaching awe. Morrison actually took a step backward. Bradley removed his ball cap in an automatic gesture of respect. Colonel Patricia Hawkins was a legend in military marksmanship circles, the woman who had trained more elite snipers than any other instructor in Army history. The mention of her name combined with knowledge of an extremely specialized technique that was only taught to the most elite students was like dropping a nuclear bomb into the conversation. "Holy shit," Webb whispered. "You're one of Hawkins' students." Morrison found his voice, though it came out hoarse with amazement. How many people even know that technique exists? Maybe 50 in the entire military. Bradley was staring at me with the expression of someone who just realized they'd been casually chatting with a celebrity. "Ma'am, if you trained under Hawkins, you're not just military. You're elite military." I felt the last of my carefully constructed facades crumbling away, like a house of cards in a hurricane. There was no going back now, no way to stuff this revelation back into the box where I'd kept it hidden for 3 years. Staff Sergeant Emma Carter. I said the words feeling both foreign and familiar on my tongue. Advanced Marksmanship Unit 4 Combat Tours, 63 confirmed kills. Medically discharged 3 years ago with PTSD after my spotter was killed in an IED attack. The silence that followed was profound and heavy. I could see them processing this information, trying to reconcile the quiet, modest woman they'd been condescending to with the elite warrior I just revealed myself to be. Webb was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. 63 confirmed kills. Jesus Christ, you're not just a soldier. You're a legend. I was a soldier, I corrected gently but firmly. Now I'm a nurse. I work in the trauma unit at Riverside Medical Center. Morrison shook his head in amazement. But why? With skills like yours, capabilities like yours, you could write your own ticket. Private security, federal law enforcement, competitive shooting, anything. The question I'd been dreading, the one that required me to expose the most painful part of my story. Because every life I save helps balance the scales for the ones I took. Every patient who walks out of our trauma unit alive is proof that these hands can create and preserve instead of just destroy. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years, despite the emotional weight of what I was sharing. When Jamie died, Corporal Martinez, my spotter, something broke inside me. Not just grief, but a fundamental questioning of who I was and what I'd become. I'd spent years perfecting the art of taking life with surgical precision. But what was the point of all that skill if I couldn't save the one person who mattered most? Bradley stepped forward, his weathered face showing genuine emotion. "Ma'am, I owe you a profound apology. We all do. We made assumptions based on appearance and gender assumptions that dishonored your service and your sacrifice. No apology necessary." I said, though I appreciated the sincerity in his voice. "You had no way of knowing. And honestly, I've worked very hard to make sure people don't know." Webb was still processing the revelation. But why hide it? Why not let people know what you've accomplished? Because, I said, choosing my words carefully, the most powerful thing about having lethal skills is choosing not to use them. Every day I go to work at the hospital, I get to use everything the Army taught me. Discipline, focus, the ability to function under extreme pressure, attention to detail, that can mean the difference between life and death. But instead of taking lives, I save them. I thought about some of my recent cases, the moments when my military training had directly contributed to civilian lives saved. Last month, we had a car accident victim come in massive trauma, multiple systems failing simultaneously. The ER was chaos, everyone talking at once. But I could process all the information streams and prioritize interventions the same way I used to process battlefield intelligence. We saved him because I could stay calm and think clearly when everyone else was overwhelmed. Morrison nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in his expression. "You're using the same skills, just applied differently." Exactly. Steady hands, precise movements, ability to make life or death decisions under pressure. Turns out those are exactly the skills you need to save lives too. Martinez, who had been quietly observing this entire exchange, stepped forward with obvious respect. "Ma'am, would you be willing to complete that hostage rescue drill? I think we'd all benefit from seeing what real expertise looks like." I hesitated, the memory of my panic attack still fresh. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. The PTSD is still very real." Webb's expression softened with genuine understanding. "Ma'am, if you're not comfortable, no one here would think less of you. You've already proven more than enough." But looking at their faces, the respect, the curiosity, the recognition of shared professional bonds, I realized that maybe it was time to stop running from all parts of who I was. "Actually," I said, feeling something settle into place inside my chest, "I think I'd like to try again. But this time, no pretense, no holding back." The transformation was immediate. As soon as I stopped fighting against my training and allowed myself to move with the fluid precision that had been drilled into me for years, everything became clear and simple. I completed the hostage rescue drill in 37 seconds with perfect accuracy, 6 threat targets, neutralized 0 hostage targets, hit movements so economical and precise that Martinez had to check his timer twice to believe the results. Unfucking believable. Webb breathed, staring at the targets. I've seen special operations demonstrations that weren't that clean. Morrison was examining the target groupings with obvious awe. "Every single shot is center mass on the threats. And that shooting position you used for the long-distance target, I've never seen anything like it." Bradley shook his head in amazement. "Ma'am, that wasn't just shooting. That was artistry." For the first time in 3 years, I felt complete. Not Emma, the nurse, pretending to be normal, not Staff Sergeant Carter pretending to be dead, but both parts of myself integrated into one whole person. "Thank you," I said simply, "for giving me the chance to remember who I used to be, and for helping me understand that maybe I don't have to choose between who I was and who I'm becoming." As we packed up our equipment, Webb approached me one final time. "Emma, can I ask you something personal?" I nodded. "Do you ever regret leaving the military, walking away from all that capability?" I considered the question carefully. No. The person I was in the military served her purpose, and served it well. But that Emma needed to step aside so this Emma could exist. Every life I save in the trauma unit is connected to every lesson I learned in combat. I'm not running from my past anymore. I'm building on it. Webb pulled out his phone and showed me a photo of a young boy with his same dark hair and serious eyes. "This is my son Tyler. He's 8 years old, and I've been teaching him that strength means physical power and aggressive confidence. After today, I think I need to teach him some different lessons about what real strength looks like." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "I think we all learned something today about making assumptions and recognizing value in unexpected places." As I walked back to my car in the crisp October afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years: peace. Not the fragile, temporary peace of successful suppression, but the deep, lasting peace of integration and acceptance. I was Staff Sergeant Emma Carter, one of the most elite snipers in U.S. Army history. I was also Emma Carter, trauma nurse, someone who chose healing over harming every single day. Both versions were real. Both versions mattered. And for the first time since Jamie's death, both versions could coexist in the same person. Sometimes, the most important battle isn't the one you fight with weapons. It's the one you fight with yourself to become whole again after being broken. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't defeating an enemy, but choosing not to let your past define your future while still honoring what it taught you. The drive back to my apartment took me past Riverside Medical Center, where I'd return to work Monday morning. But for the first time in 3 years, I wouldn't be pretending to be someone I wasn't. I'd be exactly who I was supposed to be: a woman who had learned to kill with precision and chosen to heal with the same dedication. That night, for the first time since Jamie's death, I slept without nightmares.